Okay, guys and gals, we've learned about unemployment this morning. Now we're moving on to another part of the macroeconomy. Actually, two things we'll be covering in this lesson: aggregate supply and demand, and the business cycle. All right, think back to microeconomics, supply and demand. We learned about supply curves and we learned about demand curves and how that works. All right, look at this word and say it after me: aggregate. Okay? Aggregate supply. It is labeled on graphs, on curves, as AS, where regular supply would have been listed as S. I'm going to make this really simple for you. It's a very big concept that can get you really bogged down. I'm going to make it very simple because I just love you guys. Aggregate means all. Aggregate supply means supply of everything in the United States. Okay? Let's just take it at that big statement. Aggregate demand then is going to mean all demand for all goods and services in the United States. So when I see this on an actual chart, when I see this on a curve, and this is termed long-run aggregate supply and short-run aggregate supply. For the purpose of the lesson today, we're not going to worry about long-run aggregate supply. We're going to look at short-run aggregate supply, which looks just like a supply curve. It starts at the bottom corner, it goes upward sloping, and it is always with the rule of supply. As price goes up, supply goes up. As price goes down, supply goes down. So that is the same. So just think of aggregate as all. So if I see something labeled S, I know that's supply of one given product or service. But if I see it labeled as AS, it means the supply of all goods and services, aggregate supply within a certain area, and for the purpose of this lesson, it's within the United States. Look at aggregate demand. It's a schedular graph that shows the value total of output, our whole GDP, that would be demanded at different prices and levels. Again, it's a demand curve, but instead of labeling it D, you label it AD, which means aggregate demand, which means simply all demand for all goods and services. So when we look at that particular curve, there we go, there's aggregate demand. It looks a whole lot like, a demand curve from the microeconomics unit. But it would be labeled AD, which tells you it's talking about demand for all goods and services. Not just the demand for cars, not just the demand for pizza, not just the demand for coffee or the demand for a prom dress. It's demand of all goods and services overall has shifted left or has shifted right. If it shifts to the left, we know left means loss. So if AD, aggregate demand, shifts to the left, that means demand overall for goods and services has shifted to the left. There's been a loss. And you think, well, now what could cause demand for all goods and services pretty much in the United States to lose? Oh, we must be maybe having some economy problems. Maybe there's something going wrong that we need to look at fixing. On the flip side, if the whole aggregate demand curve shifts to the right, that means overall demand for all goods and services in the United States has now gained, and doggone, the U.S. must be rocking as a demand in our economy right now. So aggregate, it's very simple. It means all. Nothing to be confused about. Now, I want you to let's think a minute about business cycles. Some of you in here have created your own personal businesses, and you're working through your business plans with those particular businesses. All right, so I want us to think about in a business cycle, won't your business likely have some good months or some good weeks and some bad weeks? I think every business has that. There's businesses that have more demand at some times of the year and less demand at other times of the year. So I want you to think about with me, let's take a floral shop. Let's say that you own a florist shop. Okay, and we think about demand for your product. When is demand for your product, if you're a florist, when is the demand probably going to be high and low and high and low? Let's think about it. All right, so demand for flowers. When is there like an overall pretty good demand for most flowers? All right, let's think about what if this is Valentine's Day? Is that a pretty agreeable thing? We've got Valentine's Day. Lots of folks like flowers at Valentine's Day. So, oh my gosh, people are buying flowers, buying flowers, buying flowers. But you think about the month of March. Not a lot going on in there. So here's the month of March. After Valentine's Day, it's a downhill fall. But then April, what starts happening in April? Oh, spring starts coming and it starts seeming more cheerful, and people might want to send flowers just because. So we've got spring coming, and then we've also got what's going on, what's coming up in a lot of schools in spring and stuff. We've got proms that are coming up, so it starts to climb back up. And then we get to the first weekend or second weekend in May, and what big thing hits for florists that is huge? Yeah, it's Mother's Day. So Mother's Day comes along, and oh my gosh, it's super busy at the flower shop. And then after Mother's Day, we're still doing well in the month of June, because June is the month for a lot of weddings, but then it starts tapering back off, and oh my gosh, through the summer, I mean, we got 4th of July. I don't know many people that send flowers in the 4th of July. So actually, for a lot of florists, other than weddings and the staple of the fact that you've got weddings going on throughout the year, and you have funerals going on throughout the year, and then you've got everyday occasions like birthdays and stuff throughout the year, their peaks and their troughs, ooh, peaks and troughs, ooh, what kind of words am I throwing out at you? Let's look at what the business cycle looks like. Oh, that chart looks really similar to this chart, doesn't it? Look at that. For any business, there's going to be highs and lows, but in economics, we give terms to those highs and lows. All right, a peak. Where have you heard of a peak before? You should have heard of it in a geography class, talking about the very top of a mountain. The peaks are the high points. So for a florist shop, there's going to be a peak in February, and there's going to be a peak in May, and then there may be some other peaks when you get down to, when you think about Christmas and Thanksgiving, there'll be another little ride. And so you notice some of these peaks are higher than others. All right, but then there's also times that you go down. Well, the bottom part is a trough. T-R-O-U-G-H, trough. Now, the only term of trough I'd ever known before, most often, since I'm a farm girl, is a trough like where an animal eats. Well, I think about it. If I'm a cow or a hog, and I've got to bend over to get to the trough, oh yeah, the trough is the low part. Yeah, the trough is the part you don't like in your business, and you need to set aside money for those rainy days, because it's going to get kind of tough. So, here we have our peaks. That's when business is doing really well. Here is a recession. We're beginning to fall. Business is getting slower. Then we hit the bottom. It's the lowest we're going to go. And then we start what we call recovery. We start expanding again. Things start getting better, and we're headed to a peak. And then we have a little bit of a trough. But notice, this trough went lower than this trough. So maybe it's like here, we've got Valentine's Day, and then there's St. Patrick's Day in spring. Maybe this trough isn't as low as this one through the summer. This one's going to be longer and lower, and then it's going to pick back up when it starts getting to Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then here comes Valentine's Day. So you've got these ebbs and flows and ebbs and flows. But what you need to remember is the high points in the business cycle is the peak. The low point is the trough, the feed trough. You have to bend over to get to it. It's the low point. Then you've got a recession. That's when you're going downhill. And you've got recovery. That's when you're coming uphill. You're starting to go back up again. So I want you to take a minute and think about some of the businesses that maybe the business you're creating, what would be your peaks and troughs. And then I also want you to think about businesses that you go and visit, that you actually go and use goods and services from them. When do you think their peaks and troughs are? All right? You'll watch a video in just a second about it. Here's the definitions of them. A peak, the high point of an economic expansion when real GDP stops rising. Contraction, a period of economic decline marked by falling real GDP. Now see, these definitions are taking the business cycle as I just explained it to you for a florist. This would actually be micro because I'm looking at one business, one market. These definitions are taking business cycle and applying it to the entire United States. Our peaks are when the United States is rocking. Woo, we're producing and doing well. Our recessions are when we're falling down. And our troughs are when we're in trouble. And then our recoveries when we're doing better. Thank you.